Welcome to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, a show dedicated to cybersecurity challenges, solutions, a journey together, not alone. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MSP 1337. I'm joined this week by Chad Holstead of BKS. Chad, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. How was your weekend?
The weekend was long, and then I noticed a weather change. I don't know about you, but we went from it being scorchingly hot to the morning is. I literally had a sweatshirt on yesterday morning because it was like 50 degrees instead of 80.
Yeah, same here.
So we just rolled through episode 200 last week, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to take a minute, episode 201, and do kind of a look back at some of the most popular episodes, not so much from the recording itself, but the topic that was used to potentially the titles themselves are what drove the listeners, right? So we'll reserve the highest ranking one to last, but I'm going to cherry pick some that made the top 10, which means they had somewhere between 125 and 150 playbacks or more. So just I didn't put them in any sequential order, but then the highest grossing one that we'll tackle last, I suspect by the end of the year we'll have gone well past 200 playbacks. So without further ado, I'm going to start with this one. I believe I had Sarah Goffman on for this one. It was "I'm Too Small for a Firewall."
Okay.
So take that one for just I think of this through two lenses, and I'd love to get your perspective on it. We use frameworks like CIS Top 18. We see SOC 2, we see some of these other ones. They all have some guidance around the necessity around firewall. But in most cases, it's tied to a legacy infrastructure, right? So have a firewall in the four walls of your brick building because that's what you should do. The spirit of the control obviously is to firewall the host, firewall the server, fill in the blank, firewall something, add a layer of protection. And so I can see how someone who has, two or three employees, they all work from home, and they just kind of say, "I'm too small for a firewall." Or they have the physical infrastructure, it's still only two or three people. They had the router installed by their service provider, their internet service provider. And so they've kind of said, well, isn't that enough? So curious what your perspective is on that, because I think this is a good one, just in general.
So I will say that even us, and we're not a small MSP, we have a brick and mortar, but we're still 50-50 remote. And we struggle with that question internally a lot. All right. Because what is you're right. Define for me what I'm securing.
Right.
That's been the biggest struggle. Because our data is not here. Literally, our data is not here anymore.
Well, I think that's kind of loosely defined because your asset that you use when you're in the office has no data on it.
Shouldn't, but I'm with you.
Okay.
Does.
Okay, so that's fair. So I think that comes back to the point of it's not so much the asset being protected. And I think we did a poor job over the years of saying we must protect the asset without really explaining to the client or even to ourselves what exactly we were trying to protect, because it wasn't so much the device that itself, it was the contents of the device. And I think we had a lot of tools that did a very poor job of identifying the type of data that might reside on the device for us to make better decisions or even provide good policy. We just didn't do it to say, hey, thou shalt not store sensitive data on this drive or this asset or in this, on your desktop. There was lots of places, right? Would that be fair? That's where we got ourselves in trouble?
I think so too, but I also think that MSPs in general are struggling going from the macro to the micro. So let me take
Is in the
pre-COVID.
endpoint protection versus the container that has
Correct.
multiple endpoints.
Pre-COVID, it was you put a firewall in Cisco, Meraki, I don't care, wrap it around your four walls, throw a VPN on it, and bing, bang, zoom, you're done. Now we have to drive from the macro, look at the building to look at what we're protecting. Are we protecting the endpoint? Are we protecting the building, the infrastructure at the building? Are we protecting an access list?
Hmm.
For us, we've decided to virtualize our firewall and went with a SASE solution because we wanted the bigger security that says, hey, I want it also locked down that you can't get to my RMM agent unless you're inside my approved network, which is now a virtual network, effectively.
Is that a song? I'm sassy and I know
Yeah.
it.
Don't ask me what it stands for. I just know that's what we use.
uh, so that's it's really interesting that you say that because I think we could probably go down a path with regards to firewall that kind of goes, what is a firewall anymore? So I
Mhm.
think about vendor products like Huntress and CrowdStrike and Sentinel One, and the list goes really, and we could go on all day just listing off vendors that are kind of in this space. Another one would be like Cisco Umbrella. Like
Yep.
it is containerizing my traffic. To your point, your firewall in the cloud, if you will, it's containerizing your traffic, right? So like previously, your exposure was immediately as soon as you hit the internet, right? And now you're containing that traffic much further out. In fact, you're probably going so far as to say these things that are external to my asset or my organization are actually still containerized behind said firewall. We're getting into this elastic world of it doesn't matter where my device has moved into, I'm still firewalling it, even if it's not at the endpoint. I'm putting a perimeter, potentially relatively big sphere around the asset that says as long as it stays inside this circle, it's being protected by the firewall.
And that's exactly it. And we couldn't get there personally until we went down to the service and device level. What
Sure.
service are we trying to protect? Office 365 OneDrive,
Yeah.
right? Data RMM. What service are we trying to protect? And how is the endpoint secure getting to that? And you start out with conditional access.
Sure.
Okay, great. How am I going to approve conditional access when I'm sitting in Colorado on vacation?
Right.
VPN. Okay. So if I have to use the word VPN, I have to have something I'm VPNing to.
Right.
So now I have the firewall. Am I putting a sonic wall in my building here, or am I putting up some type of SASE environment?
Well,
And
you bring up a good point with VPN. I was actually going to bring VPN up. So, so I think everybody knows what a VPN, virtual private tunnel, or virtual tunnel,
network.
virtual private network, because it's tunneled, right? You're tunneling to it. But something that came to mind with me when I was thinking about that is once upon a time, we did a lot of VPNing where the goal of the VPN was to get to said destination securely, but only for what was at that destination, right? So
Right.
we definitely did things where we did split tunneling was very common. We didn't want to route all of our traffic through that
Yep.
one tunnel because it would obviously bog way down and no one would be able to get any work done. But I think the world has shifted to where we don't want any split tunneling anymore. If we're encapsulating traffic through a VPN of some kind, we want all of that traffic so that we can, log it, report on it, make decisions based on, why it's doing what it's doing. Do you think that we still have a challenge with recognizing, you know, the use or the necessity of, I'll just call it VPN. I think there are other ways to solve that model, that VPN goal. But are we still seeing challenges with that where people or organizations are just not recognizing the importance of that?
I personally believe that organizations aren't doing a good job of recognizing their risk of the services that they access. So I'm going
Or,
to go back to
or
RMM.
specifically applications?
Correct. The RMM is our biggest tool, right? By far, any MSP out there, their RMM is probably their biggest risk and their biggest tool,
Sure.
right? How are you accessing it and how are you protecting it? And if you're not answering that question, how are you proving it? I mean, to your point, okay, am I doing split tunneling? If I'm doing split tunneling, am I really securing my access to the RMM? What is my risk? If I have two clients on RMM, maybe my risk isn't as big. But
Sure.
BKS manages 3,000 endpoints in RMM, right?
So I think so. Just to clarify here, because I think what this could actually button this episode up, is that firewall and VPN in the context of an MSP is looking at what is my overall organizational exposure
Yes,
on my critical apps that are essentially the whole premise behind me being able to deliver services to my clients.
correct. And how am I going to protect it? You need to answer that question for yourself as an MSP.
And we're not advocating that it has to be done through quote firewall. We're just saying that you should be thinking about whether it's firewall and VPN or a combination therein or some
Yep.
other model that allows you to achieve that. Obviously, there's things like zero trust and geofencing, and of course, there's flaws in some, if not all of those. But yeah, the premise here is that no one's too small for a firewall. No one is too small for putting the proper protections in place. So that brings me to the second one
Okay.
that was in the top five, and that was I did a fireside chat. Obviously, we do every third Tuesday of the month this fireside chat with Matt Lee, where we explore CIS top 18. And CIS Control One asset inventory is at the top of that stack. And it got me thinking, well, we're right back. I almost could have done it in a different order. We could have talked about asset inventory first, but you know, this one perhaps is the most difficult control to, as an MSP, that engineering mindset of I can't move on until I get this 100%. What does that look like for you? I know you've gone through CIS Top 18 several times over with me. You're pursuing the trust mark, and I think largely with your engagement with your client base, you've gone through more than one framework, at least for your clients. How are you seeing asset inventory as an impact, both from a managing it yourself and as well as the conversations you have with your clients?
I will say that at BKS, we are probably going to be much more uh, granular about our asset inventory than even our own customers demand. Because, to go back to the conversation about access to RMM, I take access to my customer systems to be my highest level of security.
Sure.
So if I'm going to have an RMM, I've got to make sure that every device connecting to that RMM is secure. And
Right.
in order to do that, I mean, in my opinion, the reason for Control One is you cannot secure something you don't know you have.
What?
Right?
Maybe we should talk about pen testing. I mean, I feel like I don't know how many times I've done a survey asking the priorities for CIS top 18, and pen testing comes up as the number one thing that they want to do. And I'm like, that seems like I understand the logic, but
Yeah,
it's flawed in the sense that the importance of a pen test is only going to be as good as the assets that you include in the pen test.
correct. But to get back to like the Control One, I see so many MSPs struggle with it because they, to kind of go back against they get so far into the weeds. What about my voice over IP phone? What do I do? Because you can answer, you can probably sit there, and by the time you're done with Control One, have touched something in all 18. BYOD, pen testing, right? Vulnerability
Sure.
scanning. Okay, great. You've now got some type of system that's monitoring for new devices. That also could be doing vulnerability management. How are you doing for BYOD? You've touched a lot of things by just doing Control One. Um, but to get back to even the firewall conversation, take your devices that you want to be allowed access to things and then put them in a network that you control, monitor, and manage.
Yep.
We made a conscious effort here that we don't want to really monitor and maintain our VoIP phones.
Right.
We only
That's
have
fair.
three of them. So we throw them in a secure VLAN. They're
Right.
out there on their own, right?
Yeah, if they're
Um,
compromised outside of someone's voicemail getting hacked, which in theory doesn't have any messages in it,
correct.
because so let me ask you a question because I think this is an interesting one with regards to the know your assets and how exhaustive that needs to be. Because we see a lot of MSPs, you and I have had this conversation before, where they just get hung up on, well, I'm at 65% or 75%, when to move on. And I had this thought, I've been doing this risk management workshop for the Trustmark. And one of the things that it has you do is it takes your asset inventory and says, okay, you know what your assets are. Where are you storing sensitive data? Is it on all of those assets? Is it on some of those assets? Is it on none of those assets? Because if it is somewhere in the middle, which is the reality, then it's not necessarily about making sure that you've got all of your assets dialed in your inventory sheet, but really it's about the inventory of those assets containing sensitive data. Well, through all of the things we've talked about in CIS Top 18 and others, you can mitigate, just like you described with the phones. I can reduce the probability that there's an asset storing sensitive data. Therefore, the criticality of me including that in my approved asset list starts to go down very quickly. And now my asset inventory is approaching 100% of where sensitive data is stored, as opposed to, I think that device is ours and I'm pretty sure I know what's on it.
I will agree with you 100% if we weren't an MSP. Because as an MSP, it's not just where we store data, it's what sensitive systems do we have access to. Because
Sure.
if,
You mean your
if
asset having access to sensitive data on another, essentially being a jump box to sensitive data.
and or sensitive systems, right?
Hmm.
My box gets corrupted and can jump over through RMM to another client, right? Uh, I know I'm playing worst case because we've got 2F act, we got all kinds of other controls in place, right? But you cannot can yes, where the sensitive data is at, 100%, but also where it what it can or can't access.
Right. So taking it a step further is to say an asset, whether it stores, processes, or has access to, is the premise
Correct.
of control one. But to your point, this gets into where the point I was trying to make is to say, like, no one's going to have a perfect inventory.
No, they're not.
And I think if you focus on the sensitive data component rather than this is an asset that can store data, have access to data, or process data, well, now you're getting into, let's solve that as part of this end goal, but not wait until I have 100% to keep moving through this exercise.
No, you are. I do agree with that 100%. I mean, at some point you got to go. Okay, I have 12 employees. I got 12 devices. Okay, those numbers match up. Let's
Yeah.
move on, right? Kind of thing.
All right. So
Or
moving on to the next one. This one's kind of fun. This one isn't laughable, but it's somewhat laughable. Password manager or nothing. I'll throw this out there because I just saw this in a recent framework release, SMB 1001 for the Australia small to medium business space. I want to say it's in the first 10 safeguards. It has one that says, have a password manager, and then the more advanced or higher or the more heavy lift, or your IG2, if you will, was to have it centrally managed. So not just have a password manager, make sure that it's centrally managed. So at least Australia thinks that it's important to have a password manager. What are your thoughts? And where does one go from password manager to nothing? How can there be nothing from, like, can you remember all of your passwords?
so it's so cringe. Because I'll ask my wife on something and she's like, "Oh, you know that password." I'm like, "Babe, you know what I do for a living, right? Can you put a password manager in place, please?" Because I wholeheartedly believe in it. I even forget my password manager password once in a while.
Yep, fair.
Um,
That's where
just
SSO comes into play, right? Like, so instead of having a password manager password and your SSO password, you just have one
yep.
that you have to worry about.
So I'm a big believer in password managers. I know that a lot of my team isn't, uh, mostly because they're big fans of SSO, passkeys, and
Sure.
passwordless. And I think that's where we're going eventually.
And that's not to say that you're not managing passwords. You're using a tool. This is not, you don't have a passphrase or a pass key. Sorry, not passphrase. You don't have a pass key in your head,
No.
right? Like there's some sort of token app or otherwise that's allowing you to authenticate without using your traditional credentials.
What we're struggling heavily though with is both internally and even at our customer level is the BYOD portion of passwords. So with 2FA, you need to have some type of authenticator on your laptop, on your device, right?
Sure. So, oh, a BYOD app for password.
Yes. So you still have like I use Keeper, right? So I still need to use Keeper for 2FA, even on my mobile device. If we're going to go with pass keys or passwordless or SSO, we still need to use mobile devices. And employees are like, no, 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 no. My device. You can't put more stuff on my device unless you're going to pay for my bill. And I tell my employees, I at BKS said, yes, I will pay your bill or I will get you a second phone. You choose. Um,
Yeah.
the but we're getting a lot of pushback on having to put applications on people's mobile devices to help manage and monitor passwords in 2FA. So
So
we
I want
always
to ask this
keep them
question.
on.
How many of those same employees say no to putting their work mail on their phone?
So that's actually where this all started as part of our job description requirement is that you must have access to Teams and email. I know we could be a little over the top on this, but you have to access email and Teams when you're not in the office. Okay, that's a
Yep.
requirement. We're a 24/7 shop. Now we're getting to the point where if you want access to Teams and email, we need your device to have Intune.
Sure.
And you need to have all of these password management solutions in there too. The Intune one is what all of a sudden flipped the trigger because now we're monitoring, right?
Well, surprise, if they put Outlook on their phone
We could
and
do
they
it too.
authenticate, it's already doing that, which
Correct.
is kind of ironic that now you add the next layer and now they get squeamish about something they already said yes to.
Yes. But the we're getting a lot of pushback across the board from both internally and even customers. I don't want anything on my personal phone. And one of our customers said, fine. Then we are completely putting, they went Adigy, along with a full VPN solution. They're buying, they bought 180 new phones for their employees and gave everybody a phone and said, you know what, here you go.
I would love to have been responsible for that commission check.
Yeah, no kidding. Um, but at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer in password managers. The implementation of them takes a little time. So,
Well, and I think that's what I liked about the SMB 1001 is it articulates that you're probably not going to do this well without engaging an MSP or some sort of IT person that has some understanding in how to implement things like SSO. And obviously, this sort of gets into dictating whether or not you're using the consumer grade password manager versus one that supports more of a centralized management, the ability to watch for things like, no, you've got repeat passwords. You're still so the point of password manager isn't that you have all of your sites in there with the same password. It's
password
and
one,
I
two, three, password one,
yeah,
two, four.
and I saw a vendor product the other day. They're still in beta, but they do auto password rotation. You can set the cadence for how often it rotates passwords with the sites that it's been connected to. So that's a big change, right, from what we get today, which is click on the link, go to the site, log in, change the password. This is automated, changes the password. You don't have to worry about it anymore. So I think that evolution is one of the areas where password managers are still largely lacking. But yeah, I agree. I don't think even browsers that have the capability to manage passwords have come a long way from, when the browser is opened, assuming you just opened it, you can actually set some rules in there that says the access to those passwords is also encrypted versus it's just a plain text file that's
Correct.
been properly structured to make it easy to find find the
Yeah.
password. So, all right, password managers cross that bridge. All right, this one's close to the top of the list. This one was business continuity and disaster recovery. So obviously we could add in things like I know we talked about on that episode, incident response and since that episode, which I think it was recorded all the way back in 2021, so it's been out for a while. One of the things that we've started talking about since then, which 3 years, is business disruption planning. And what happens if we saw this with CrowdStrike? What happens if I now have to go sit in front of every endpoint under management? What does that do to my organization? And how do you plan for that going forward? We talked about work from home and remote employees. Like this just amplifies that, right? If you had to go sit in front of the blue screen and not at every office with, say, 35 workstations that you can wander around and get, well, done in, let's say, the course of a day, this is going to every single employee's location to get access to the asset to do that, reset. So I'm just curious what your the thoughts are. I know you've gone through this quite extensively. I can see why this one's so high on the ranking. Business continuity is a tough one, and we often lose sight that disaster recovery and incident response don't work very well if you haven't planned for business disruption and business continuity.
I agree with that, but I will also say that I think people overthink this one.
Absolutely.
Um, like for a great example here, we don't have a server in our office. Okay. All of our data is either is in SharePoint or in IT Glue, effectively. A few more other places, but in long and short of it. And at the end of the day, we've planned for and we've tested our SharePoint backups and our other systems backups to make sure that we can restore from them.
Sure.
Our biggest worry on a disaster in our scenario is is usually going to be environmental. Internet's out, power's out, storm, that kind of stuff. Our initial disaster recovery is everybody has to leave with your laptop every night.
Sure.
That way, if I have a storm, you can work from home, kind of thing, right?
No, and I think that's really interesting that you say that because infrastructure is going to go down. It might
Yes.
not be your infrastructure, but someone's infrastructure is going to go down. We've seen this with regional outages with Microsoft. We've seen it with data centers getting hit by natural disaster. I actually was part of one going way back where the data center we were in, the redundancy was okay, but what we ran into is they couldn't get the fuel trucks to load the generators, and eventually
Yep.
the generators went down. So even though we had all the redundancies we needed, no one had ever planned for, well, what if they can't get down the highway because it's missing?
Yep.
So yeah, like, and then I think, you got to be careful with planning for every scenario too, right? So if you have a scenario that should be like that fill in the blank scenario, but largely your processes are going to be very similar, if not the same. First, check to see if all of our employees are okay. Second, and fill in the blank as you go. However, I think when we get to things like the incident response side of this,
I That's where
we
it gets
immediately
important,
go
right?
down a terrible rabbit hole where we start talking about the worst case scenario rather than a how do we minimize this? What's the responsibility matrix look like? Or we get carried away with like that employee's gone too. It's like, well, let's work through one scenario at a time before we get to the, all of C-suite's gone and we're just left with department head or whatever it is, right? Like I think we've turned we've turned disaster recover or sorry, incident response tabletop exercises into like the most hardcore D&D game where we've just added a third die into the equation because we want to make some complexities with regards to who can do spells and how much points it takes off that are not real world probable scenarios to ever take place.
No, and I think an MSP should be looking at once again. I mean, this all of these conversations go right back to have you looked at your risks? Where
Sure.
is your biggest risk? Well, okay, so for BKS, all of our data is in SharePoint.
Yeah.
Okay. God forbid somehow our SharePoint data gets ransomed.
Yep.
All right. Now we kick in our incident response plan, right?
Yep.
And we start following through the checklist. And the first checklist piece is get the logs, right? Um, then you go, I know my guys tabletop the CrowdStrike here. They actually did a pretty good job of tabletopping the CrowdStrike and what would happen. And the
Sure.
first piece is communication for that one,
Yeah.
right? It's that you're aware of it and you're moving forward. You can't plan for every scenario, but you can throw a couple plans out there so that your team knows how to respond to them. And
Well, this is just a great way to say it. If your team knows how to respond, then the fear factor goes away, right? Like
correct.
now we know what to do. We're not knee-jerk panic attack making decisions that are, counterintuitive and destructive to anything that's going to come next.
I think the bigger piece of this, and this is my own personal feeling too, and I have this, it's the anxiety of something happening.
Sure.
Is it my fault? Did we let this in? Did we do our job? Are the customers going to be pissed at us? Pardon my French, mad at us, right? That's an anxiety that every human is going to feel. Um,
I'd be
and
concerned if you didn't have that feeling, right? So your clients should be having those feelings too, not because you are going to fail them or their employees are going to fail them, but just the reality of the fact that every element to this equation involves people.
correct. But the more we work with our own team, the more we have conversations with clients, the more you build up relationships. When something is hitting the fan, people are working to resolve it. I had a friend of
Sure.
mine, it was actually kind of interesting. We had a client that was having a lot of problems with servers, and it was presenting as a some type of attack. We
Sure.
could not figure it out. And we just happen to have a friend of mine that is a pretty intelligent person as far as it comes to cybersecurity and IT infrastructure. And he was in our office working on a project with us, and he looked at me and goes, Chad, this is a problem until it's not.
Right.
He goes, it's not a data breach, it's not an incident, it's a technical problem until it's not, kind of thing.
Right. This
And
is getting into like to say the B word is out of line with if you don't understand what's causing the problem, that means you've got to do some work until you solve
it
that. Like what's the root of the problem?
was kind of funny because he basically told me because I was causing anxiety because this was a big customer at the time. He's like, just go sit in your office. He goes, I don't care if you play on your phone. I'll help your guys out here. Just go sit in your office. You're causing more problems.
Right.
And I
What
think,
did you figure it out? Did you figure it out? Did you figure it out?
yeah, I think that's where, when at the end of the day, the more practice that we do, the more
Yeah.
documentation we make around checklists
Yeah.
and incident response, the better off we're all going to be, kind of thing.
It's like no one becomes a detective just because they asked for a badge, right? Like there was a lot of work that went into the learning how to the psychology of what does it mean to try and figure out and solve problems that you don't just get. I mean, good detectives and bad detectives both exist. Hopefully whoever's on your case is a good detective. And I think the goal with any of your engineers is that they're essentially becoming good detectives or at least know where their limitations with their skill set is to bring in someone who is more detective than they are rather than, like you said, allow the anxiety to creep in and go, well, I didn't find it in my first Google search. So that means that the solution must be broader than it's a technical problem. It now must involve, and
Yep.
now they're spiraling, right?
So
Yeah, BCDR, incident response, business continuity, business disruption, all important. Obviously, that's why it was in the top five. Last one, and I think people probably listening would be able to figure this one out. Zero Trust. That was the highest grossing, will likely hit 200 plus in between now and the end of the year. And probably because we're talking about it right now, people are going to go searching for Zero Trust because they might not have listened to it. That one has been out for actually it's been out quite a while. It was actually done in the first year. So this was done in July of 2021 and it's still getting playbacks, which means that there's something to that title. So Zero Trust, where are you at with Zero Trust within BKS?
so good, not great.
Oh,
Um,
that's a good starting point. Okay is better than none.
I think we're doing pretty good zero trust on our network because of the SASE solution that we've
Sure.
implemented. Um, we do not have a true zero trust PAM solution in place, but we got one that is better than having none.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Um, as far as data access goes, that's where we're starting to. We don't have a good enough one. Uh, Too much of our data is wide open, and that being said, it's mostly rated as non-confidential data, anyways. Um, but too much of it is wide open.
So this comes up a lot. PAM solutions, I know a lot of MSPs that have implemented one of the handful that we talk about on a regular basis. And I think what's interesting is that in many cases, even though the zero trust has been implemented, anytime someone asks for the just-in-time access to install, or they've got an application that they're not quite sure why it's in the environment, but they haven't removed it, is that like, oh, well, I needed that for this. If it even gets questioned, right? Like, so, oh, my guys, they only, so the just-in-time is yes, approve, yes, approve, yes, approve.
That's where
Um,
we're getting bad.
yeah.
Yep.
There are some solutions out there, and we've seen this from like PCmatic and Threat Locker and some of the others, is like when you put it in listen only mode and look at what's being used and then narrow down from there, I think you can get to a true zero trust a whole lot quicker. It also identifies the things that you probably have needed for a long time to remove from the equation and just haven't done it yet. And I think it also puts into motion the opportunity for employees to actually articulate the value of the things that they're using that other employees don't know about. I love it when someone says, I don't use that remote management tool or that remote access tool. And going back to the Screen Connect debacle of like, yeah, we don't use that. And then it's like you scan the environment. It's like, hey, we only found it on 35 of 75 machines. So yeah, not bad at all. Um, but that's part of what we deal with all the time. And I think that's one of the areas that we're good at ignoring or I don't want to say ignore is probably not the right word, but we post, procrastinate addressing because we don't want to upset somebody because they do use it or they should be using one, they're using the other, and no one's ever had a conversation as to why one is of value and needs to be used and not the other one. I don't know. Maybe that's
No, you're exactly right. And I think it also boils down to, once again, asset management.
yeah.
Okay. So
Yep.
this morning,
Control too.
yep, one of my guys had a request for some virtualization software that he wanted to run on his laptop, right? So we approved it without we
Without
talked
even
to our
checking.
cybersecurity guy. It got approved.
Yeah.
But more to the point is we never circle back to him and go, okay, are you done with it? Can we remove it? Right? Why is it still there? Do we still trust it? Do we still trust you? And we don't do a good job because once we approve it, it automatically gets added to the whitelist, and now we just assume it's good. We need to go back through that whitelist on a regular basis and make sure something didn't get put on that whitelist that shouldn't be there.
Right.
Um, and that's the biggest thing about all this process is you're never done.
No.
It's always constantly improving, right?
Yeah, I think zero trust is a term that is interpreted differently by a lot of different organizations, but I think the reality is you have to know what you have to know what you need. And once you've figured those two things out, then I think it's about how do you reduce your threat surface, and that is narrowing. Like I don't need four apps that do the same thing. I might need two. I might need a secondary so that in the event that something fails, I have another path to get there. But even that might be a risk not worth taking. Like, hey, if this Connect tool that allows me to remotely manage that device goes down, maybe that's something we just accept because the reality is of having that secondary tool is too risky for the organization. Or, I mean,
Yep. I
all
mean, we
right.
have two different remote monitoring softwares
Yeah.
because a lot of times the first one will break.
Or they don't see the same things for the same, perspective as everything with a lot of these tools, right? They were built by different teams. If they were built by the same teams that had the same checklist for what needed to go into the tool, then we would all use the same one, right? or very likely we would all use close to the same one.
Same. Yes.
So with that said, we've gone through the five. So firewall, we talked about asset inventory. We started digging into software safe or software asset inventory, which I think we probably talked about a lot on that call or on that episode, anyways. We did password management and the change that we're seeing in the space, right? If we were to do cyber hygiene, we'd probably highlight things like make sure you do SSO and 2FA and have a password manager and well, actually, that'd be pretty substantially three big things that someone could do in the organization to reduce the threat surface. Then we talked about BCDR. Obviously, this is a one that you brought up a good point of it's overanalyzed. We try too hard to do a perfect scenario, and we never actually get a plan in place because we're still working on, what to do if Chad's not there. And then the big one, zero trust. I think there's a commonality across all five of these, and I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to that monitoring and communication that has to happen both internally with your staff and client facing for any of these to actually truly get enforced.
Yep.
Any last things to share with the audience as we tackled only five of the many popular episodes?
My biggest thing is don't get overwhelmed. Just get started.
There you go. Uh, one step forward is still good progress, right?
Correct.
All right. Well, for those of you listening, this has been an episode of MSP 1337. Thanks and have a great week.